Hey, what's up guys? This is Oakley and I am going to be playing as Rome. I know that I haven't played them enough in the past, and because I just love them historically, I figured, I'd give them a chance, and I don't quite know why I didn't. I really like their diversity. I like how they have low, medium, high, and very high tiered units. I think they're very, very cool, very nice, a lot of diversity, a lot that you can do, especially with the way I like to play. I don't like to cap out just on elite units. I like to bring a lot of mid-range and low-range units and try and use them in in a beautiful way, in a more coordinated way than some of the people who might spam and charge. I like to play the game with a little more finesse, and I think Rome allows me to do that. Rome as a faction, you saw being played a lot in the beginning when Rome obviously was released, just because everyone thought they would be really good and they're fun to play. The unit diversity had a lot to them. They're pretty straightforward to play as, and they're doing well. But of course, then after that, everyone realized the barbarian spam worked, and due to later patches and stuff like that, you haven't been seeing Rome played as much. But I figured, I am going to try my hand at them, try and pick them up, and try and come up with some builds and strategies that I can hand over to you guys and show how those might work. Anyways, my main strategy here is to form up a standalone group here, and they're basically going to be the main control group that I have, and then the wing on the right is going to try and move around the flank and do something with my opponent. Anyways, regarding my opponent, he's actually a very, very nice guy. I dropped into quick match and he said, hey dude, I like your channel. So apparently he's a viewer, or he's seen me at some point, so we had a nice chat. He's a very nice guy. He was very polite. He asked me, or he said basically that I'm ready anytime you want, and he didn't ready up. He gave me all the time I needed, and it was a very, very polite back and forth. So I was looking forward to playing with him, and yeah, just seeing how he played. Anyways, something you also run into is when people say they've seen you on YouTube, well then presumably they kind of know how you play. So I was a little worried about that, in the sense that I figured he would probably anticipate that I would be hiding some units. So I decided to not go the usual obvious hiding approach that I usually do. I kept all my units sort of positioned out front in the open, and they're going to be moving up. Now these guys of course are out of sight, but I didn't keep them hidden, and they're soon going to be exposed to my opponent. Let's talk about the theory behind what I'm doing right now. As you can see, I have, if I were to press 1 right now, it would highlight that entire group of sort of the core that's on my left wing, this group right here. That's something I recommend you guys should start doing, especially at the start of the battle. Line up your main battle line in a formation like this, a formation that you can feel comfortable moving up. You can see I have spears on the flanks, I have spears in close support, spears around the back, and it's something that if I were to be attacked all of a sudden would hold up very well. So go ahead and do that. It allows you to micro that main group, and that's going to be sort of the main push of your army. And then once those guys are moving in certain areas, start microing the peripheries of your force. So for example, what I do here is the periphery of my force includes a lot of cavalry on this flank and some triarii and some elephants. My opponent is going to start forming up here, so I'm going to move the bulk of my army here, and then start moving my extremities into the wings, or into the forest, to see what's going on. What you'll also see me do is, even though these guys aren't, they weren't hidden at first, and they're on the move, and they're sort of flanking, I'm going to go ahead and just stick them in the forest anyways. What I've shown you in a lot of my videos is the advantage of having units hidden in the forest. Don't think that stops after the beginning of the battle. Like, if your opponent has seen your troops, you can still stick them in the forest and it's just as effective. You'll see that happen in this battle. So for example, those units there moved up, and I just kept them in the forest, hoping that my opponent would forget, and you'll see just where they come in. Anyways, you can see my opponent is moving more of his forces up here. He sees the threat of my main force, and these guys are going to be coming up or down off the hill, and they're going to try and collapse on my forces. As I said, however, at the base of this forest, I do have my units that moved up, and now they're in the forest. So that has several advantages. One, it allows you to maybe, on the off chance, have your opponent forget that you even have troops there. Now that's unlikely, but what's more likely is he may think that you have troops there, and you probably do, but he might forget the exact composition, he might forget what numbers you have, he might forget a lot of things, and just the fact that your opponent thinks there are troops there but can't see them will throw sort of a wrench into his plans, because I know when my opponent moves forces into a forest, I'm very wary of that forest, and even if you don't have that many men in the woods, he might even be scared to approach it. So there's a lot of dynamics that go into hiding your units, how that affects how your opponent thinks, how he moves, and how you might be able to exploit some of his mistakes. There's no reason not to hide your forces even into the battle as you move up and you gain control of some of the forests. So what I'm trying to do here is I see my opponent is mostly in the woods. What I'm trying to do is form up on even ground and try and get an advantage there. I want to take over this ground and fight my opponent on open territory where I can hopefully get my slingers to do enough damage to whittle down his men as they move forward. But what my opponent is smartly going to do is start shifting his forces over to the right. He thinks that he can basically knock out my forces there. What I'm doing right here is moving most of my forces here, and he's just matching with 2-3 units, whereas the rest of his army is going to knock out my wing on the right. So that's very smart. That's exactly what you should do to counter my build. What my opponent does wrong, however, is, as I said, he forgot about those units, or because they weren't visible on his minimap, he couldn't click an attack order. Whatever it was, it meant that these guys were not on an attack order on my guys. They're mainly just marching through, which gives me the advantage and allows me to intercept his guys as they were going to take out my wing. My thinking is, okay, let's move these slingers up here to hold off his forces. These guys are going to try and hold off the main push of his army. I know that because I ambush him all of a sudden, he's going to be sort of in recovery mode. And usually when players are in recovery mode, when they get ambushed, they kind of just throw everything at the clump that's been ambushed. So I know that my opponent is obviously going to be doing that. So I have to do everything I can to take advantage of him sort of focusing anew on that. So I'm only putting a couple units to face off to the left, and I'm going to move my main infantry line up here just to halt his units from moving forward. You can see it drew his attention, it slowed him down. I have no intention of engaging just yet. I want to get these guys finished with the flank and then retreat them. And those guys over here who I just drew out of the woods on the very right of the screen, because I hit those guys, my opponent didn't know he was going to be in that much of an inferior position, and I'm able to knock out his guys. Anyways, take a look on this flank. My opponent has some guys there, so I'm going to reform, try and pick them off, and I'm going to face off against his guys here. You can see his guys are a little bit in disarray. I'm also reforming my line. My opponent is going to have a numerical advantage here, but in the back I'm able to knock out some of his forces, and I have true area right there, which is very important. The reason I brought elite spear units right there is to hold down that flank in case something like this were to happen, something I recommend you do as well. Anyways, I'm going to try and put those guys over there. I'm going to shift more of my skirmishers to the front lines. I'm going to try and start picking off his men. If he's not going to engage with me, then I'm going to use my range advantage. My opponent's sending in more troops here. He is taking out, I basically, as a summary of what's going on this flank, I've lost an auxiliary cav and gladiators, but I think they've done enough damage on their own, and they've caused chaos in his forces. They've killed enough men, and at the same time, I've been able to isolate some of his noble cav and take them out. So I think all in all, it's been pretty even exchange. You can see right here, but these Triari are going to cover these guys as they try and finish off his noble cav. He's coming in with more reinforcements, but I'm hoping I can finish off his men. If not, I'm going to move in some elephants just in case. My opponent is withdrawing the other flanks, that's good, but what he did is he left these guys out in the open. I'm going to go into quick reload and put some more hurt on his men. I anticipate my opponent is going to try and do something about it, so I'm going to move in my main line just to support them in case my opponent decides to charge. Over here, my opponent's moving in with the vengeance. These guys finish off his noble cav, so I'm going to do a quick retreat, try and pull these guys out before he can envelop me and hurt even more of my guys. You can see his naked fanatics right there. Basically lost 20 men in just 1 or 2 volleys. That's exactly how you want to use your velites, and why I recommend everyone bring at least 1 or 2 skirmisher units, because they can take out some elite units just like that in the blink of an eye when you take advantage of your opponent's lack of micro or his attention elsewhere. I'm retreating my right wing over here. His guys right there basically called off the attack because they're going to be outnumbered, and then boom, my elephants come and knock in, basically kick in the door and kick his ass right there. And I'm able to take out one of his units with, I think, no losses. So that's exactly what you want to do, is bait your opponent to come out and then swarm him. You can see engaging with the elephants right there is probably the best way to use elephants to mop up units like that, because they have a lot of health. Even in one of those engagements, they're not going to lose many men. They're good at wrapping up units, especially when they're forced to retreat like that. My opponent basically couldn't hold his ground. He would have had to have more units in order to hold his own there. He realized that he was in no state to attack, so he retreated, and at that point he was already too far engaged. If he turned around, you know, I could have just shot him or charged with my elephants, which is exactly what I did. Anyways, my opponent is going to try and salvage the situation by shifting his guys over to the right flank and try and take out my guys who are exposed. I'm going to try and intercept his forces as they do that. He has a lot more men over here than I do, so I'm going to send my units over here to try and help out. As I said, I don't really need that many guys holding the flank over there. My opponent is likewise shifting his forces over here. So I'm going to try and intercept his forces here. I'm going to move my slingers and my velites over there. And these forces over here are basically going to be caught. I'm going to charge in with my weaker cavalry unit to pin his forces and move around the flank with the other cav unit. I'm going to put my triarii into square formation just so they can hold out even longer, move my elephants in for support. These guys here are going to be charged with the task of essentially attacking his motionless cavalry there. These guys are going to be the rear guard, and they're going to hold up back against his units that I know are in the forest there. At the same time, I'm going to keep moving my own units, try and force them slowly but surely over towards this flank and try and relieve the pressure here. Going to charge in with my cav right there, moving with my general, bring the elephants in. His own cavalry here are charging in against my guys. I'm going to pull them right behind the back of my legionnaires. Make sure you have your legionnaires spread out in support of your units. And that's basically how I recommend you use Rome, is bring 5 or 6 of these legionnaire units as your core and then sprinkle them throughout so they can support either your spears, your cavalry, or most importantly your center, where you should keep probably your skirmishers. Anyways, another one of his cavalry units is going to be tangled up in my main line, and I've isolated more of his units than not. These elephants here charge right into his men. I'm going to be doing a good amount of damage, and the rest of my opponent's forces are going to be moving up. Going to move these cavalry in here, try and pull my general out because I don't want him dying right away. But my opponent is going to be using numbers to his advantage to surround me and basically annihilate these guys. So I'm going to have to try and come to their relief, but my guys on foot are just so slow. Anyways, my elephant's doing pretty well. Going to reinforce with gladiators, hope that they can knock him out soon enough, but I know that at this point my general is basically on his own. I can only inch slowly but surely forward with my infantry corps, and in the meantime my opponent is moving the remainder of his forces back. I'm going to try and get rid of them with my slingers in the back because I know all his cavalry over here. So what I can do is try and pick off his men at my leisure as they try and come back and reinforce. My triarii are doing pretty well, and right now I'm going to try and move these guys. They've knocked off another one of my opponent's units, and I'm just going to keep steamrolling my way through here, while his reinforcing units back there are going to be subjected to my rear guard. In the rear guard, you can see I left slingers and velites because I know I can pick off his units at range. The rest of my forces are going to be moving to take out these guys and relieve my forces. My opponent is going to start drawing out his guys. He doesn't want to get engaged in there, and he's going to allow for more time for his units to basically come together. My elephants are going to come in right here and try and chase these guys off the backs of my triarii. They come into trample mode. You can see, at least in the center, my opponent came, knocked out my general, and decided it was time to get out of there, which is a very smart move. Over here, my units that were told to hold basically the rear are doing what they do. I know my opponent's going to try and charge, so I'm going to move in some of my armored legionaries to defend them once that does inevitably happen. I'm going to move my skirmishers back around, and my opponent is going to start swinging around his cavalry. That's going to be dangerous for me because it means that he can now finally chase off these guys. So I'm going to move them behind my core infantry and just charge in with 2 of my infantry units here. I know that's enough to match two of his own units. I'm going to keep one of my veterans there to ward off his cavalry, and over here keep mopping up. I think I'm going to hold out pretty well. These guys here are going to try and engage with his reinforcing units there. I'm going to try and do a lot there. Push those legionnaires over here to keep his cavalry off my back. His infantry are retreating. That's the move to do. Don't engage if you don't have to. What it does do is force these guys to basically suffer the full brunt of my forces here. My opponent's going to fall back to the forest, which leaves this flank over here basically up to the fighting capacity of just a couple units. So that's going to be what's securing my back. Over here, I'm going to reform my line. His cavalry have fallen back, but I'm going to use my range advantage to pick off his forces, which have gotten too close. I'm going to make sure my triarii and my other units are in close support. I'm going to reform my men, and basically what's happened is it looks a little bit like a Teutoburg forest replay where the Romans are outnumbered in the mist and the fog of the forest, and my opponent is going to start surrounding me. But at least I do have some ranged units to pick off his men. Over on the right flank, you can see I've once again become isolated. That's exactly what you should do when fighting me. My opponent is doing very well in taking full advantage of that. But his units here are similarly caught out in the open, and I'm going to use everything I can to try and get them to suffer the consequences of being left out to dry. Anyways, he uses local superiority to knock out my men here. That's exactly what you want to do in the mid to late game in order to free up as many of your men as possible. What I'm going to do is sort of form up into a bit of a defensive formation here. Put my triarii in the center to defend my legionnaires. My legionnaires are going to form the perimeter of my army, and I'm going to try and pick off anytime I can some of his units here that charge heedlessly forward. I'm going to use the fact that I have more of a skirmishing advantage to kill his men as they charge forward, and at the same time use my legionnaires to secure the flanks. Anytime he does an about face like that, it just gives me an opportunity to shoot him in the back with some of my slingers or velites. Anyways, I'm going to keep shuffling my forces around, try and face my opponent. My opponent is going to start shifting his forces around. He's going to get a full 360 degrees around on me, which is, again, another thing you want to do. It's a sign of a good opponent. However, my legionaries are still pretty much intact, and that's why I like bringing a corps of legionaries, because they always are going to be the bread and butter of a Roman army. They're going to be what it comes down to. I'm going to selectively charge these two units here, expend their pilla, and basically take out half of these units right here with the pilla exchange, and that's going to cause them to rout almost immediately, and then I'm going to decide to reform my line. I'm going to tell these guys to start targeting his men here. These guys are going to throw their pilla, and I'm going to tell them to charge into his cavalry. He got a good charge there, but what I know that does is every time he charges in with the cavalry group, it basically holds down some of my men and allows him to go around me. So I'm going to try and keep that from happening, keep that from basically tying up my forces too much. My triarii are going to switch with my armored legionaries there. I know his cavalry are going to try and engage with my skirmishers, so I'm switching my triarii there, putting in my more stable legionaries to face off against his infantry. I know that's a more comparable fight. His guys in the back are moving in, so I'm going to try and target those guys, hold them up with my legionaries, and then the skirmishers in the center are going to try and make the decisive blows on his forces as they move forward. Going to put quick reload, going to try and put as much damage as possible onto those men. Triarii are going to move forward, going to put them in quick march so I can try and catch his cavalry who are trying to shoot the gap. However, he's quick enough to move out. And, you know, that's going to be a problem for me, because I know if my triarii get too far away, he's just going to scoot around me and go right after my guys. However, he has snuck in some infantry, which means his cavalry are free to run around the sides. This will be a problem. Some of his infantry in the back have caught up with my slingers. That means the center has been opened up to a cavalry charge. However, my triarii were able to finish off some of his units, and they're going to come and clip his units on the charge as they move in. Opponents popping his general abilities right here, but at least my legionnaires did their work and were able to kill his units there, so I can turn around and face his cavalry. I'm going to try and salvage the situation by pulling out some of my skirmishers around this fight here, shoot the remaining units right there in the back, and again, as I always say, try and free as many of your clumps of infantry as possible. Either get numerical superiority or use something like slingers here to try and tip the scales. So you can see right here, it's basically legionnaires against cavalry. I know I can win this, especially when I start throwing in some slingers right there. That's going to devastate his cavalry, and the rest of his forces now are going to start crumbling and falling. So very, very good battle to my opponent. He did all the right moves. He did allow himself to be a little bit drawn out and fell for some of my hidden components. So I would tell my opponent to maybe be a little bit more wary about that. Otherwise, very, very good battle, and I really liked it, especially having sort of the thematic battle between Rome and the Arverni. Very cool to see, very cool to have, very cool to have it enabled with a very skilled opponent. Anyways, you can see here the stats of my army. Elephants did very well, 197, triarii pretty well, and overall the kills are spread throughout my army. That's why they're all very, very effective and all contributed in their own. Yeah, so I hope you enjoy this. I will see you guys next time. Thanks so much.